In Chapter 7 of Fire Emblem 1, you first encounter Minerva. She's the princess of the enemy country Macedon, and she's a powerful wyvern lord set against you on the battlefield. However, before clashing with Marth's forces, she orders her honor guard, the White Wings, to retreat with her, as she decides that this is not actually a noble cause that she wants to fight for. And later in the campaign, she turncoats and actually joins up with your army in order to help fight the evils planted within her country. As a wyvern joining about halfway through the campaign, she's one of the most powerful units in FE1. In fact, she's my pick for the best unit in Fire Emblem 1. But regardless of where she falls on the FE1 tier list, she is undoubtedly iconic, which is why future titles would feature characters in similar positions, seemingly as a throwback to Minerva. Whether or not this is an archetype is a question for a later date, but it's hard to deny that characters like Altena, Cormag, or Jill share a lot with the first wyvern in the franchise. And Fire Emblem Fate's Birthright similarly has a wyvern from the enemy team join your forces to fight for justice, that being Scarlet. While new players might overlook her due to joining alongside Ryoma, Scarlet has incredibly high stats and a powerful class set, making her a worthwhile addition to any army that is lacking in firepower. And the same is true on the Revelation route, where she's arguably even better, due to the fact that Flight is at a higher premium in Rev than Birthright, and her access to the Bonite line is more appreciated on a game that isn't simply enemy phase spam. But for some reason, despite all of these advantages, I don't really hear people talk about Rev Scarlet very often. I understand that a number of strong pre-promotes join around the same time as her, Xander and Ryoma being the primary two, but Leo, Fuga, and Shura also being quite strong, and even some unpromoted units like Silas and Hinoka can steal the spotlight from our lovely girl in red. But you have enough deployment slots to field all the broken pre-promotes you want, so there's not really a good reason not to add Scarlet to your team. And I intend to prove that, because today's video is going to be exploring the most slept-on unit possibly in the entire Fire Emblem franchise, Fate's Revelations iteration of Scarlet. This video is part of an ongoing series with the goal to do a deep dive into every single playable unit in Fire Emblem Fate's Revelations. Yes, even that one. Despite the fact that the game has a reputation for being terribly unbalanced, I truly believe that every member of the cast can contribute to your team. But units in Fates are highly customizable, and this goes doubly so for Revelations, where each cast member has new options that are not available on their native routes. And so my goal is to go over the multiple potential builds that every member of the roster has. That way, if you want to play through Rev on its highest difficulty, you can utilize whoever your favorite characters are. I'm not going to pretend that all of these units are equally viable. In fact, a secondary goal of the series is to come up with a Revelation tier list. But I really do believe that everyone is at least salvageable and can offer you something unique. While this series is going to be focused around the lunatic difficulty, much of what I say can also apply to the lower difficulties of hard and normal. Those difficulties have lower numbers for the enemies, so it's easier to reach stat thresholds, but things like various reclasses, available friendships, and specific builds that you can go into stay universal despite what difficulty you intend to play on. With all that out of the way, let's dive into our unit review. God, that's either the worst or best series name I've come up with. There's no middle ground. As you might expect from a pre-promoted wyvern, Scarlet has bonkers stats. 32 HP, 22 strength, 18 skill, 19 speed, and 23 defense, with her only weak points being 4 magic, 7 res, and 14 luck. And even 14 luck is less of a weak point and more of a not a strong point. If you're wondering how good these stats are, they're comparable to Camilla. In fact, Scarlet is better than Camilla in almost every area. She has higher HP, higher strength, higher skill, higher luck, higher defense, and equal speed. Although some of these stats will be slightly buffered if Camilla reclasses to Wyvern Lord. Now, you might expect that with such good bases, Scarlet is going to have trash tier growths, similar to Gunter, but that isn't the case. A 60% growth in both strength and speed is impressive, allowing Scarlet to keep up damage output as the campaign goes on, and 45% defense growth alongside a 40% HP growth means that her bulk isn't going to fall off that hard either. Her skill and luck growths are also coin flips, with 55% skill and 45% luck, meaning that despite using axes, her accuracy really isn't going to suffer that much. Compared to Camilla, this is an area where Scarlet falls short, but we're comparing her to one of the best units in the cast. It's okay for her to be a little underwhelming. Although, if I'm being entirely fair, growths are not the only area where Camilla has Scarlet beat. Camilla's resistance means that she can function as a mixed tank, and her decent magic means that she can use unrestricted 1-2 range and choose whether to hit on res or defense. And of course, the main thing that Camilla has over Scarlet is availability. Although, I think sometimes people make a bit too big a deal of this availability lead. Camilla joins in Chapter 13, and Scarlet joins in Chapter 16. They're only 3 maps apart, y'all. Yes, Scarlet has a bit of an awkward availability situation after she joins, but in the Conquest route, Elise misses out on the pot map, and nobody says that she's bottom tier just for skipping that, so I think we should extend this same leniency to Scarlet. Joining next to Xander and Ryoma means that there's still half the game left. Although, I think units that would be an easier comparison are Shura and Fuga, because they share the same Achilles heel that Scarlet does, that being their status as Corrin sexuals. For those unfamiliar with the term, Corrin sexuals is what the Fates community uses to refer to the group of units with a very limited support pool, oftentimes just the avatar character. Whereas most of the cast are able to pursue a small number of friendships and a larger number of marriages, Corrin sexuals are limited to either only Corrin or only Corrin and one other unit. And this is a downside not only because you can't get the extra stats associated with a higher support rank, but also because the support system is how units gain access to new classes. For example, if Hinata and Oboro get married, Oboro can become a samurai and Hinata can become a spear fighter. In an attempt to make up for this lack of flexibility, Corrin sexuals are given 3 classes in their base set instead of the standard 2. So let's take a look at the 3 that Scarlet got. I probably don't need to spend that much time talking about why Wyvern is great. Flight is at a premium in most Fire Emblems, but especially Revelation, where there are a number of flight-intensive maps at almost every stage of the game. And as such, it's hard for any flying class to be bad, but Wyvern is particularly good because it just has really good stats associated with it. High strength and defense mean that most physical combat units get elevated by Wyvern access, and axes are a pretty good weapon type to have. They have the highest might tied with bows of all weapons, and even though their hit is fairly low, the dodgiest enemies in the game are ninjas and swordmasters. And both of these enemy classes are capable of using swords, so you can leverage the dual club to invert the weapon triangle and get a massive hit bonus against them. Axes also have one of the most important effective weapons in the game, the hammer. Generals and Great Knights can be some of the hardest enemies to take down. Even your mages will often struggle to one-round them. But the hammer is the highest might effective weapon against them. And since many of these units will have lances equipped, you can even leverage the weapon triangle for extra hit and damage. But Wyverns also get lances as their secondary weapon type, meaning they also have a way to hit horse units for effective damage, with the Beast Killer. Or you could leverage effective damage against any sword user with the Sword Catcher. There's one of these effective weapons for each of the traditional weapon triangle. The Sword Catcher is a lance that is effective against sword users. The Axe Splitter is a sword that is effective against axe users. And the Pike Ruin Club is an axe that is effective against lance users. But the advantage to the Sword Catcher is that is the only one you get for free in Keldori's Paralogue. Both the Axe Splitter and the Pike Ruin Club must be paid for if you wish to acquire them, and personally, I don't think these effective weapons are worth the investment. They have lower might than Hammer and Beast Killer, but are just as expensive as these premium effective weapons, so I think that purchasing them is an unnecessary tax on your economy. However, the free one you get from Keldori's Paralog can be useful against Swordmasters in particular. Although it is worth noting, Swordmasters are incredibly dodgy, and the Swordcatcher has pretty shaky hit, so you're probably going to want to use it alongside an accuracy boosting skill, which unfortunately the Wyvern line does not offer. But Scarlet's second Heartseal line, Outlaw, does provide a solution to this problem. The level 5 skill for Adventurer is Lucky 7, which provides an extra 20 to Scarlet's hit and avoid for the first 7 turns of the map. I think this is a skill that is simultaneously over and underrated, depending on who you ask. The reason why Lucky 7 is good is plus 20 hit is a lot, and while it is confined to the first 7 turns of a map, in many maps the most important combats happen towards the beginning, since oftentimes a chapter begins by having you kill an initial wave of enemies before engaging with the later ones more safely. However, in Rev, if you're not LTCing, maps can often drag on long past turn 7. And once you pass that magic turn number, Lucky 7 isn't doing anything for you. It's functionally just an empty skill slot. While this criticism can theoretically apply to Lucky 7 on all routes, I think Rev is the biggest offender when it comes to long-lasting maps. There's a few you can clear relatively quickly, like chapters 20, 22, and 23, but much of Vala is going to be a tax on your turn count, with big maps like 18, 21, 24, and 25 being some of the big stress points of the average Rev playthrough, at least in my opinion. Early maps can also last quite long, like chapters 9, 10, 12, and 14, but those are also maps where you're unlikely to have access to a promoted level 5 skill. But Lucky 7 isn't the only appealing thing about the Outlaw class. No, actually, most of the skills Outlaw has access to are highly desirable. Lock Touch is unimpressive, but you usually want 1 or 2 Lock Touch users on your team, and it's especially nice if one of them is a flyer, like Scarlet with Wyvern access. Move +1 is exactly what it says on the bin. It gives you an extra point of movement, which is always nice. It gives you extra flexibility in your positioning, and allows you to get into or out of danger much more easily. Past the level 15 Adventurer skill is relatively niche. It lets you go through enemies as if they weren't blocking your path. And it's a skill that I find is most useful if you have tightly planned out a clear, in particular if you're trying to do a skip. But in a casual context, it can occasionally come in useful. It's probably the least good of the skills that Outlaw has to offer. On the other hand, Bow Knight gives you Rally Skill, a nice reliability buffer, and at level 15, Shuriken Breaker, which gives plus 50 hit and avoid against enemies using daggers. I mentioned earlier that ninjas are some of the dodgiest enemies in the game, so having a massive amount of extra hit against them is quite nice, and can allow you to get 100% even when not at weapon triangle advantage, although bow users will always be at advantage against knife users. And that's probably the main appeal of the Outlaw class, because not only are you getting a bunch of really nice skills, but Bow Knight is one of the better combat classes in the game, combining excellent stats, good movement, and access to bows, the best weapon type in Revelation. Because bows have the high might I praised axes for without any of the hit issues. In fact, they are tied with swords for the most accurate weapon type in the game. If bows themselves are not packing enough of a punch for you, you can use Yumi instead, as they have even more might than bows, but sacrifice 10 hit, which is usually not worthwhile unless you have an accuracy boosting skill. And, well, I just went over 2 accuracy boosting skills that Outlaw has access to, so sometimes you can even leverage the extra might of Yumi. Now, unfortunately, while Wyvern and Outlaw are premier class options, Scarlet's third one is not so desirable. because it's Knight, one of the most consistently memed on classes in Fire Emblem. At the very least, both General and Great Knight maintain Axe access, which means Scarlet can leverage her high starting Axe rank. And the combination of a high strength and defense growth means that Scarlet can lean into being a physical bruiser. But whether you go General or Great Knight, it's hard not to feel like it's a significant downgrade from the Wyvern class. Not only do you have a lower movement value overall, but you also lose flight, meaning you'll be slowed by terrain and won't be able to access all of the areas that Wyverns can. Losing speed also means you won't be hitting as many doubling thresholds, overall lowering Scarlet's combat prowess. And it's not even like there's particularly desirable skills to grab from the Knight line. Defense +2 and natural cover both increase Scarlet's bulk, but not by a significant enough amount to warrant spending a heart seal. And the promoted skills are all kind of a joke. Wary Fighter stops you from getting doubled, but Scarlet is fast enough that that shouldn't be a problem anyway. Pavise is a chance-based skill that lowers the damage you take, but Generals are already bulky, so you shouldn't be taking that much damage if you go into the General class anyway. And Pavise doesn't even affect magical enemies, so you can't patch up the res weakness with it. On the Great Knight end of things, Luna is another luck-based skill that cuts the enemy's defense in half, oftentimes just resulting in lower damage than a critical hit. Definitely not a skill worth grabbing. Although, they are a YouTuber worth subscribing to, link in the description. Probably the best promoted skill from the Knight line is Armored Blow at level 15 in Great Knight. It gives you an extra 10 points of defense when initiating, which can be nice if you're attacking someone who you don't kill, or you need to double to kill and don't want to eat as much damage on a counterattack. But there are other ways to avoid taking damage on counter. If your unit has a high enough strength, then you just one-shot. And even if you're not able to reach those thresholds, using bows or tomes to outrange the enemy functionally gives you infinity defense. It's worth noting that in an earlier entry in this series, I mistakenly thought that Armor Blow gave 20 defense, not 10, because Warding Blow gives 20 resistance, so I assumed the two of them match. And even under that false assumption, where Armor Blow was twice as good as it actually is, I said that Armor Blow was pretty bad. That's an indication for how bottom of the barrel we are when it comes to level 15 skills. Still, 2 out of 3 ain't bad, and Scarlet gets 2 very good class sets. It's arguably better than Reyna's, another Corrin sexual I rate very highly. And much like Reyna, Scarlet starts in probably her best class, Wyvern Lord. If nothing else, it's a great fit for her short term. Because 2 maps after Reyna joins, in Rev 18, Flight becomes an essential tool in your kit, with multiple islands floating far apart from each other. And this is something that will repeat in 20 and 23, alongside some trees for her to fly over in Chapter 22. Unfortunately, this is where Scarlet's weird availability jank comes up, because she's not actually available for any of the chapters I named. In fact, the only main story chapters where you can use Scarlet in your army are chapters 16 and 17. There's no getting around this. This is a pretty huge downside, but it's important to remember that Fates is not solely comprised of main story chapters. So you are entirely capable of using Scarlet in Invasion 1, Invasion 2, and any of the paralog maps. Scarlet matches up very well against the enemies of Invasion 1, having the stats to effortlessly one-round them and take very little, sometimes even no, damage in response. Compared to another unit who joins in the same chapter, Late Jacob or Late Felicia, this is an outstanding performance. Unfortunately, it doesn't maintain as much in Invasion 2. These enemies are a lot more threatening, and there's even some Bow Knights who can potentially shoot Scarlet down, alongside Dark Knights who can target her weaker resistance stat. But Turnabout is fair play, and Scarlet can leverage the Hammer and Beast Killer to deal a bunch of damage to the various Dark Knights, Great Knights, and Bow Knights present on this map. Unfortunately, Scarlet cannot participate in Invasion 3, since that's not available until the last chapter of the game. But she still has a quite good performance in the Paralogs. Paralog 1 is pretty obviously a good showing for her. The Faceless deals 0 damage and she one-rounds all of them, including the boss. Quite impressive, especially when you compare it to the performance of the unit who joins on this map, Mozu. Mozu isn't able to deal any damage to the Faceless on Lunatic mode, instead needing to rely on dual strikes from actual good units like Scarlet. People like to cope that Mozu is good because she can reclass to Archer and bows are strong, but Scarlet can immediately become a Bow Knight, which is basically the same thing. Better actually because it's mounted, and as everyone knows, mounted units have Canto and are good at rescue dropping. Of course, Scarlet's usefulness isn't just limited to Paralog 1. In Paralog 2, the Kana map, she can fly over the various rivers that you fill up or drain. Alternatively, if you want to make her into a bow unit, there are several very scary Falco Knights that she can easily one-round with access to even just a bronze bow. These are some of the scariest enemies on the map, so Scarlet's performance against them is quite impressive and quite impactful if you want to recruit Kana. Meanwhile, on Paralog 3, Shigure's map, Flight is probably preferable, since this map consists of 3 boats that can separate from each other, so Scarlet being able to dart between them is valuable. Although if you would prefer to keep her in Bow Knight or Adventurer, there are plenty of enemy bow users for her to fight, and with proper positioning, you can enemy phase them. And in Dwyer's map, Paralog 4, Bow Knight continues to be useful, as not only are there enemy snipers and ninjas for Scarlet to fight, but also if you want to one-turn on the map, you need someone with Lock Touch, and Scarlet gets it with just 1 level in either Bow Knight or Adventurer, since she'll acquire it from the Outlaw class. This is a unique bit of utility that very few units other than Scarlet can offer. Most Lock Touch users start with it rather than getting it after 1 level, so again, points in Scarlet's favor. She doesn't waste the EXP, she makes good use of it by getting a new skill. And bows continue to be useful in Paralog 5, Sophie's map, as not only are there some scary Wyvern Lord reinforcements, but playing the map quickly is going to reward your bow units because the boss, Nicol, is a Malignite, so you can deal effective damage to him and potentially even one-shot him. The fact that Scarlet is on a horse is really beneficial here too, because the higher movement means she reaches Nicol sooner, which is important because there are some suicidal green units you want to protect on that map. Keeping enough of them alive nets you rewards, including a valuable partner seal. So a footlocked unit like an archer or sniper is not going to fare as well as a bow knight would. And heck, you can even speed the process up further by having Scarlet pair into a flying unit. Bow Knight gives +1 move, and then you have a flyer who can effectively switch a bow unit to the front. Now that's strategy. In Paralog 6, the Midori map, bows are not necessarily at a premium, but thankfully Scarlet's other upside, Flight, is. The premise of this map is that you're chasing the dastardly Candace through a bunch of forests, but your flyers can actually go over the trees in order to corner her and defeat her once and for all, claiming the dragon herbs and the $1 million baby Midori all for yourselves. Paralog 7 is the Shura map, and this is one of the few desert maps in the Fates trilogy. You can negate the terrain by activating Dragon Veins, but even still, it's useful to fly over it. The unrestricted movement of Wyvern once again comes in clutch, especially if you want to rescue Shiro because he's quite suicidal if you don't fly a rescue staffer to yoink him out of danger. Paralog 8, on the other hand, is a great map for Bow Knight Scarlet. It's the Kiragi Paralog, and every single enemy is a flyer, meaning that she can deal effective damage and usually one-shot all of them, including the incredibly high-level and dangerous Kinshi Knights and Falco Knights. Saizo's map doesn't really have anything for flight or bows in particular, other than some dangerous shuriken enemies, but 2-range is nice because it lets you shoot over the doors and occupy the enemies who would otherwise unlock them. The high movement of Bow Knight alongside Move +1 is also beneficial because this is a map that is on a timer. And before anyone in the comments corrects me and says this is actually Asuji's map, have you paid attention to the story? Asuji is actually named Saizo, 5-head. Paralog 10 is the Selkie map, and flight is at a premium here too. There's a mountain that you want to fly over to recruit Selkie as quickly as possible, because her AI is a little bit wonky and she can put herself into a dangerous situation, which, considering Kitsune is not the bulkiest class out there, is probably something you want to avoid. Hisame's Paralog isn't technically a desert map, but it really feels like one, since there's so many waste tiles that severely limit your movement. In fact, waste is a more restrictive tile type than desert, and you don't have any dragon veins to work around it. As such, Scarlet's flight and good combat is at a premium here. And the fact that Wyvern Lord gets access to both axes and lances is also nice because it means Scarlet can fight against the Faceless regardless of what breaker skill they have. Flight is also nice on Paralog 12, Mitama's map, because there are plenty of rivers zigzagging around. This is a terrain that you can once again negate using Dragon Veins, but if you want to remain advantageous as opposed to the Berserkers and other enemies, being able to fly over them is going to be to your advantage. Similarly, Paralog 13, Keldori's map, has 2 islands separated by a large body of water. Zooming between them with the Wyvern is going to be the optimal way to get to both sides of the battlefield. And Paralog 14, Rajat's map, has plenty of swamps and wastes for you to fly over. Paralog 15, Siegbert's map, is a very tough one with a lot of terrain and constantly spawning Void Curse enemies. A popular cheese strategy involves fielding a bunch of flyers in order to stay safely away from the grounded enemies, which means that Scarlet's innate flight access is useful for this. But even if you're not planning on cheesing the map, Scarlet's flight is very nice for getting around the various terrain effects. She can escort your Dragon Vein users to the Dragon Veins as quickly as possible, or simply leverage her flight access with good combat stats in order to delete as many foes as she can. Paralog 16, the Forest map, is a very tricky map if you want to recruit Forest, since you're on a timer but facing a lot of dangerous enemies. You can of course entrap the Lock Touch Berserker in order to cheese this map, but if you're not doing so, any number of strong combat units are going to be nice, and Scarlet is a strong combat unit, whether she's a Wyvern, a Bow Knight, or even an Adventurer. But speaking of Adventurer Scarlet, she's only 3 arm scrolls away from being able to use an Entrap Staff to yoink the Lock Toucher towards you. That's a very small investment to get yourself the best femboy in Fire Emblem. Paralog 17, Ignatius's map, is one that I know a lot of players struggle with. Ignatius is defending a village and on a bit of a timer before he dies and causes a game over when the village is seized. An easy solution is to have a flyer carry Benny around the top right mountain and to Ignatius, getting there within 3 turns. There are a couple of freeze mates making this more complicated, but if you don't have someone who can kill them, it's possible to get around them either by taking an extra turn or using a flyer with the Move +1 skill, which hey, Scarlet has in her base kit. Paralog 18, the Valoria map, has a giant mountain that you can fly Scarlet over in order to rescue the Wolf Girl. Alternatively, just having good physical combat stats is good on this map. Since the Dragon Vein allows you to turn off magic for a turn, you want to prioritize your physical units and not your magical ones. And that means that Scarlet is better than Camilla on this map because she has a worse magic stat, obviously. Paralog 19, the Percy map, also has a lot of terrain for you to fly over. There's a series of mountains, and you want to get to the Dragon Veins as quickly as possible in order to deactivate enemies and turn them into gold. Paralog 20, the Ophelia map, wants you to divide and conquer, to get as many houses as possible before they get destroyed. Scarlet's high movement, either as a Wyvern or a Bow Knight, allows you to get to the houses quickly and eliminate enemies effectively. She can even use the hammer against the dangerous generals, or use a bow against the various dagger users. Paralog 21, the Soleil map, once again has terrain for you to fly over, but 2 range is at a premium here, both because you can shoot enemies over walls and because you can fight across the movable barricades. That way, either as a bow knight or a wyvern, Scarlet is useful. And heck, you can even use a heart seal on map to switch between roles if need be. Finally, Paralog 22, Nina's map, has a lot of uses for a bow unit with extra movement and lock touch. You want to spread out and kill the fleeing outlaws or collect the treasure chest before they can. So I think I've pretty thoroughly demonstrated why Scarlet is not only useful on every Paralog, but a genuinely huge asset to your army on the majority of them. If you chain them properly, Scarlet should be scoring kills left and right, skyrocketing her performance and making her even better on future Paralogs than she was on the earlier ones. But you might be wondering, why would I bother feeding Scarlet all these Paralog kills if she's not going to be available on any of the main story maps that follow? Isn't all of that just a big pile of wasted experience? And I can understand why you would think that, but that's because you're dumb and stupid. Even though Scarlet is going to permanently leave your group at the start of Chapter 18, that doesn't mean leveling her up and feeding her kills is a complete waste. Because we need to talk about the statue mechanic. Statues are one of the weirder building types associated with the My Castle system. Each playable character, aside from capturable generics, has their own statue. And you are able to build that unit's statue depending on how many kills they get. Once that character gets 20 kills, you can build their level 1 statue for 0 Dragon Vein points. Once they get 50 kills, you can upgrade it to the level 2 statue at the low cost of 3 Dragon Vein points. And once they get 100 kills, you can spend 9 Dragon Vein points to upgrade it to a level 3 statue. Unlike other buildings, you don't actually interact with the character statues. Instead, they passively buff your army depending on what level they're on. You see, each character has a stat associated with them that is considered their specialty, and their statues will raise the caps associated with that stat. At level 1, the statue will only raise the cap of the unit it's a statue of, but at level 2, it'll raise the cap of anyone who has a C support with that character. And at level 3, it just raises the cap for everyone in your army, regardless of their support level. So if you can pay 9 Dragon Vein points and get Scarlet 100 kills, you can raise the defense cap of every unit in your army. So while it's true that if you feed Scarlet kills, your other units are not gaining stats, they are gaining to their cap. And your cap represents the maximum you can get in that stat. Therefore, it's actually more important to gain cap than gain stats. Because if you gain stats, you will eventually run up against your stat caps, and then you can't gain any more stats. So by feeding Scarlet kills, you are successfully feeding the rest of your army. Now that's a worthwhile return on investment. If I learned anything from my Reyna video, it's that y'all want me to go over cool builds, even for the Corrin sexuals. Unfortunately, due to the limited class access that these units have, there aren't really any unique skill combinations or other builds that they can go into. Most of what makes the Corrin sexuals unique is their innate class access and join time. But each of them at least does have one thing that they can truly call their own, and that is their personal skills. And Scarlet's is a real doozy. In Extremis is essentially Fates' version of Wrath. At 25% or lower HP, Scarlet will gain 30 crit, which is a huge boost. If you choose to have Scarlet marry Corrin, you can combine this with Deathblow from the Oni line, which itself grants plus 20 crit on initiation. Scarlet actually joins with a Killer Axe in her inventory, almost as if it's hinting towards making her into a crit machine. But since we're on the Rev route, we don't have to limit our builds to the Killer Axe. The Great Club is a Hoshiden weapon with 55 innate crit. Unfortunately, it only has 45 hit. So you're probably going to want to supplement this hit with Lucky 7, which Scarlet has access to through Adventurer. The Great Club is also a fairly low might weapon, so Strength plus 2 is a must for this build. Otherwise, even with quadruple damage from crits, you're not going to be killing much. And since you have to keep Scarlet below 25% HP, you can't afford to not kill foes. Unfortunately, this is about as far as you can push Scarlet's crit build. She just doesn't get access to anything from Wyvern or General that would help to supplement either her accuracy or her crit rates. Even with a resource as valuable as Corrin Marriage, you can only really grab one skill you care about. But that's not the end of the line for critical hit Scarlet, because while she can't gain anything from Heart, Friendship, or Partner seals, those aren't the only seals available in the game. There are 6 DLC seals, although 4 of them are gender locked, so Scarlet can only access Dreadfighter, Dark Flyer, Witch, and Great Lord. Still, these classes do offer some interesting options to supplement Scarlet's kit. At level 35, Great Lord gives Awakening, which is like Scarlet's personal skill but on steroids. Whenever you're at 50% or lower HP, you get 30 added to not only your crit rate, but also the hit evasion and crit avoid. This not only helps to further increase Scarlet's crit, but also continues the job of fixing Great Club's accuracy issues, because when combined with Lucky 7, you get plus 50 hit, leading to a total of 95. The other notable DLC skill for this crit build is Aggressor, which comes from level 35 Dreadfighter, and gives you an extra 10 might on player phase. Since you're already focusing on player phase deletion thanks to Death Blow, it just makes sense to continue to look for effects that apply on player phase, and Aggressor does a similar thing to Strength plus 2, only 5 times as powerful. Of course, with Dreadfighter in the mix, we don't have to limit ourselves to player phase builds. Scarlet can take advantage of Samurai from Corrin Marriage in order to be an enemy phase crit machine. Dreadfighter offers dagger access, so you probably want to use the Barb Shuriken, since that has unrestricted 1-2 range and can allow her to crit whoever she wants regardless of what they're attacking with. For this build, I would recommend the Samurai skills of Vantage and Life and Death. Vantage means if you're below 50% HP, you always go first, and in order to have both Awakening and In Extremis active, you need to be below 50% HP anyway. Life and Death is a simple bargain. You deal 10 more damage, but you also take 10 more damage. But if you're Vantage sweeping enemies, you don't care about that second half. Lucky 7 from Outlaw supplements your hit, because even though Barb Shuriken has 80 hit, which is more than the Great Club, it's still less than ideal for a weapon you don't ever want to miss. The low health builds just can't afford any measure of unreliability. On that topic, Awakening is useful here as well. The extra 30 crit and hit are both going to be clutch. And lastly, Strength plus 2 helps you push the damage threshold further, which is even more important with the Barb Shuriken than the Great Club because it is reduced to 4 might as opposed to 6. Still, as long as you set Scarlet up to be below 25 HP, then you can have her sweep entire battlefields, and get that level 3 statue in no time. Of course, if you're not convinced of the efficacy of +1 defense cap to your entire army, then perhaps you'd rather use Scarlet in a support role and let other people get the kills. And thankfully, she has a build for this as well. Scarlet can be a Rallybot, with 5 rallies actually. She can grab magic and luck from Corrin, as long as Corrin has the monk talent, and these supplement her native rally skill and rally defense. But using DLC seals, she can add a 5th to her repertoire, that being rally movement from the Dark Flyer class. Not only is filling every single skill slot with a rally a relative rarity amongst the cast, but movement is the best stat in Fire Emblem. I saw that in a YouTube video once. Therefore, Scarlet is the best rally bot in all of Fire Emblem. And if we learned anything from the Conquest community tier list, it's that rally bots, specifically Rallyman, are at the very least A tier. And since Scarlet is better than him, she must be an S tier unit. But earlier in the video, I proved multiple times that she's also better than Camilla, who's usually considered to be S tier. I don't have Camilla on the tier list yet, so we need to indicate Scarlet is better than Camilla in some other way, which is why I'm creating the S++ tier for her. This is a level of eliteness that not even Sigurd, Seth, and otherwise skilled units could dream of. but I think Scarlet has pretty thoroughly earned it, and this video serves as a good demonstration as to why. Whether you want a combat unit, someone with flyer utility, a rally bot, or just the ability to increase your unit's caps, Scarlet is going to be there for you. She fits all playstyles and all team compositions. And if that's not the mark of an S+ unit, I don't know what is. Well, except for maybe being my patron, because I think everyone who subscribes to my Patreon is also an S+ unit. So thank you to Eris, Len, Gameboo, Karosa, Fyrant, Your Doctor, Guiji555, Smaz Ruby, Zycrom, Robin D, Alenby, Hound Dogs, Girl Boss, Lizard Bongwater, Christopher Bueno, Marin McLean, Jaden, Calamity Callie, Thaythom, Andu, Reflect, A Clever Username of Lies, Erica Ford, YLO1, George Grenville the 7th PM, Jamie Collins, Mean Jojo, Thick Molder, Arvis, Tailored Muffin, Floahay, Faulty Videos, Lyra, Toaster But Really, Kyle Madison, Derek Williams, Just Riley, Anna Cabana, Some Trades, Die Psych, Ginger, Root Beer Pants, Queen Eliza, Aerith Emblem, Adele, Gabe the Green, Controlled Aegis, Roman Cormancic, Knick Knack Hammersmack, SUP, Caius Cole, Heiseklop, Bree, Punchfighter Champion, Eggman, and especially my Jagans, Autumn Kelsey, Toaster But Really, Lilzabeth, and Sherman's Wife. Your support means the world to me. It's what makes this YouTube channel even possible. If you'd like to financially support the channel, there is a link to my Patreon below, but please only donate if you can comfortably afford to do so. I don't want anyone going broke over Fire Emblem content. If you want to support me for free, liking, subscribing, and sharing the video, as well as commenting your thoughts on the God Queen that is Scarlet, are the best ways to do so. Before we go, I do want to give special thanks to Discord users POTUS Official and Astra Rosa for inspiring some of the degeneracy you heard in this video. But with that being said, I hope you have a wonderful day. Stay safe, gamers.